civil course of action to address abuse of children. We want to protect kids from abuse, help ensure permanency for kids, provide good ongoing care for kids that have experienced abuse, and encourage the reporting of suspected abuse or neglect. So, statute defines child abuse as physical, mental, or emotional abuse, meaning the infliction of physical, mental, or emotional harm causing deterioration to the child. Neglect means acts or omissions by the parent or guardian resulting in harm or presenting a likelihood of harm to that child. Neglect can be failure to provide appropriate food, clothing, and shelter. If the family's only not providing those things purely due to financial means, like they cannot afford it, it doesn't rise to the level of legal neglect. There may need to be some interventions, right? But there is a difference, right? You guys, Kelly, know that my kid's gonna get picked up in flip-flops and a hoodie, shorts in the dead of winter. It is not neglect, right? You will get to know your kids and know who truly might need some winter clothes and who is just more stubborn than their mom. Neglect can also be failure to provide adequate supervision for a child or remove them from a situation that they are not mature enough to handle. Neglect can also be failure to get medical treatment for a diagnosed medical condition that would help that child. If they're not getting that medical treatment due to religious reasons, it may not rise to the level of legal neglect. Sex abuse for this is talked about child pornography and human trafficking. So we are all mandatory reporters. Anybody that works for a school district is a mandatory reporter. If you suspect abuse or neglect, you have to report. You should report right away, and you can report to DCF. There's lots of ways to get a hold of DCF. If you can't get a hold of DCF, contact local law enforcement. You can make the report orally. Sometimes they'll want information in writing. They're going to want all the details you can provide about that child, the family, and why you suspect abuse or neglect. You're that first line of the investigation, and you can make a difference. I was in one of these trainings a couple years ago, and one of the subs talked about she had been in the restroom and heard a little girl crying as she tried to use the restroom, triggered something in her. She reported suspected abuse, and they followed up with her and let her know that she had made a huge difference in that little girl's life. Right? We hope, right? It's Maze, that doesn't happen here, right? It can happen anywhere. So be aware, but again, it's not black and white, right? Again, if my kid shows up without appropriate winter clothing, it's not necessarily neglect. You have to use some of your own discretion in this, right? And I think a lot of times it's gut and the hair on the back of your neck that's telling you what's right and what's wrong. But claims are going to get investigated. If we think abuse or neglect is happening in the home, it's often going to be DCF that goes in and investigates. Maybe they remove the child from home, and maybe they just need to wrap that family with more resources so they can stay together and have what they need. If we think abuse is happening by school personnel, it's typically going to be law enforcement that gets involved. Exploited and missing child unit is often who we hear from. Then if you're convicted of crimes against kids, you have to be registered through the central registry, and DCF manages that. So a lot of our school guests that come into our building, we send them through a quick Raptor background check, and we're really checking the offender registry list. Lots of laws out there protecting kids. Clearly the crimes against kids, the consequences are going to vary based on severity, prior criminal offense, things like that. Some kids will report abuse directly to a trusted adult. Other kids won't report it. Some kids don't even realize it's abuse or neglect because it is their normal. That's what they think life is like, unfortunately. Again, one instance or indicator may not be proof of abuse, but it might be repeated patterns that really make you question things. Things to look for: bruises shaped like objects. Again, burns like objects, like a cigarette burn. Broken bones, head trauma, black eyes, missing teeth. Again, second grader walks onto the bus with no front teeth. That's normal, right? High schooler walks in with no front teeth. That might be a whole different issue. Behavior indicators of physical abuse, and a lot of these things, it's change, right? It's understanding what a kid's normal is, and all of a sudden it's not anymore. They used to be really calm, well-behaved, and now they're super aggressive, right? Or vice versa. But looking for extreme behavior changing, withdrawal, self-harm, depression, sleep problems, things like that. Emotional abuse is the infliction of mental or emotional abuse causing harm to the child. Includes terrorizing a child, creating fear through violent and threatening behaviors, inconsistently disciplining a child, or leaving them in an unstable, unpredictable environment. It could be emotional abandoning, rejecting, ignoring, or withholding affection. We're not going to see the same bumps and bruises, right? The physical indicators are not the same for emotional abuse, but you may see anxiety, sleep problems, extreme behaviors, destructive behaviors, habit disorders, and lots of things that they used to really care about. Physical indicators of neglect could be that constant hunger, lack of adequate nutrition, lack of proper clothing or hygiene, lack of medical care, lack of shelter, physical or speech delays, and failure to thrive physically or emotionally. Behavior indicators of neglect, it could be that begging, stealing, hoarding food, trying to extend their stay at school, fatigue, delinquency, running away, or extreme behaviors. Sex acts solely between children is considered abuse when there's intimidation, force, or coercion. Some physical indicators of sexual abuse could be STDs, pregnancy, bruising, painfulness, things like that. Behavior indicators that overly seductive behavior, sexual abuse of fellow students, fear of being touched, running away, or engaging in risky behaviors. Again, we're all mandatory reporters, so are first responders, medical professionals, mental health professionals, and a lot of people working in nonprofits. You cannot delegate your responsibilities to report. If you suspect abuse or neglect, you need to make the call to DCF. You don't get to come in and tell Kathy and expect Kathy to do it, right? Because you have different information than she was. We play the game of telephone and the message gets messed up and garbled as it moves down the line, right? And that's what happens if you try to delegate your responsibility to report to somebody else. If there's ever a death of a child and you suspect abuse or neglect, you're supposed to contact the coroner. And it's really important that you make reports in good faith. If you decide that you want to make life hell to the HR director and you report me for child abuse or neglect, right, and you're only doing it to be mean, you could end up with a misdemeanor, jail time, and a fine. But you also have immunity so that if you do it in good faith, I cannot successfully sue you as a parent for reporting me for abuse or neglect, right? So, questions on being a mandatory reporter? Hope you never have to do it, but if you do, you can make a huge difference for a kiddo. Homelessness. Some of you guys are familiar with McKinney-Vento. This is the legislation that oversees all of the protections for kids facing homelessness. It's designed to address problems which homeless students face in enrolling, attending, or succeeding in school. It ensures each homeless student has equal access to the same free public education as anyone else and has access to achieve the same standards as anybody else. So, a homeless child or youth is defined as any individual who lacks fixed, regular, adequate nighttime residence. So this could be doubling up, couch surfing, sharing housing, living in hotels, motels, trailer parks, abandoned buildings, places that aren't designed for sleeping. So state law requires that districts look at their policies and procedures and address barriers that may keep that family from being able to enroll and succeed in school. We're not allowed to segregate or stigmatize people based on their housing status. If we get a kid in and we don't have all of their school records because they're coming into a homeless situation, we don't get to just put them in this transitional classroom over here, like who has resources for that anyways, right? But we need to get them integrated with everybody else as soon as we can. We have a lot of paperwork requirements when we enroll kids in school. Even for transportation, you're gonna want some proof of residency, right? But if I fled domestic violence and I'm homeless, did I pick up my kids' birth certificates on the way out the door? Probably not. Does that mean my kids shouldn't get education? No. So we are gonna waive some of those paperwork requirements, get the kid into school, and then our liaison is gonna work with that family to track down all the paperwork and those requirements. A big part of McKinney-Vento is the school of origin, and that is, the school of origin is this place where the kid was last enrolled or attended when they were housed. If you can imagine living with whoever will take you in for a few weeks at a time, you could be in a different boundary or a different school district every few weeks. Changing schools that often would not be good for anybody, which is why we have to try to keep that kid in the school of origin when it makes sense. If they're still within the same district, that district needs to bus them back to the school of origin. If they're in a different district, the two districts have to work together to figure out how to provide transportation back to that school of origin. Which is why sometimes when Kathy comes to you and says, hey, I need you to go to Hayesville, you're like, what the heck, right? But maybe we have a kiddo that's their school of origin, or Mays is their school of origin, and we're figuring out how to make that work for that kiddo. It's also what people try to get you in trouble for, because they want to know why the Mays vehicles are way in some other district, right? We've got good reasons sometimes, hopefully all the time. But again, we're always going to make that determination in the best interest of the child. Where should that kid attend? And look at several factors. The parents' wishes in these situations are really important. We're going to try to honor their wishes. If the district and the parents really can't agree on where that child should be educated, there's a whole formal dispute resolution process that we'll work through. But we're going to look at the age of the kid, distance of the commute, safety issues, their need for special instruction, and how much time is remaining in the school year, right? Can we get through the next 2 weeks, or is this going to be a long-term thing? Like I said, each district has to have a local liaison that will help with a variety of things. They'll oversee that dispute resolution process if there is one. They're a good go-between between the family and the district to, again, help that family access the paperwork and all the things they need to be able to enroll in school. They'll help connect them to community resources that they may need and make sure they really understand their rights. Sometimes we have older kids that end up being their own guardian that also need to understand their rights. The liaison can provide some professional development to our staff who are working with those kiddos if they need. But at the end of the day, we have to remember those kids, even though they're experiencing homelessness, have access to the same free and appropriate public education, the same programs to be successful as everybody else's kids. So, there's some resources out there. So, questions on that? Okay? Am I talking about something? All right, bullying. Traditional definitions of bullying incorporate the following concepts. Bullying involves intentionally, largely unprovoked efforts to harm another. It can be physical, written, verbal, direct, or indirect in nature. It involves repeated, persistent, or pervasive negative actions by one or more against another, and it involves an imbalance of power. We're going to talk about 5 different types of bullying. Physical bullying, right? This is the most traditional form. Anything done to hurt somebody's body or damage their possessions, stealing, shoving, hitting, fighting, destroying property, things like that. When my son shoved my other son's head into the school bus window, that was probably physical bullying. Thanks for that call. Okay, this is really the first form of bullying that a kid will experience. It often begins with a different form and progresses into physical violence. Although it's the most readily visible and identifiable, it accounts for less than 1/3 of reported incidents. Verbal bullying, this is any bullying done by speaking, calling names, spreading rumors, threatening somebody, making fun of others, right? Most common type for both boys and girls, usually it's hard to detect and is often overlooked by adults. And I think right there is not a clear black and white line of you're bantering, you're teasing each other, oh, you crossed the line, you're now a bully, right? It's really hard because I think as adults, kids need a chance to try to work things out themselves to a degree, and knowing when to step in is hard. I've also been working with some middle schoolers lately, and I speak fluent sarcasm, and so occasionally I hear middle schoolers say something and I assume they're being sarcastic. Clearly middle schoolers don't understand sarcasm because all of a sudden somebody's feelings are hurt and it's very dramatic, right? And so it's like, I was like, oh, that was a thing? Like I heard it, I didn't even know it was a thing, but all of a sudden it was bullying, and I'm like, oh. Right? This is why I work in HR and not with kids usually, so. But again, verbal bullying, most common, hard to detect. Relational aggression, any bullying with the intent to hurt somebody's reputation or social standing. This can be like gaining their trust and then intentionally breaking it, or making them feel included and then all of a sudden making them feel excluded. It's often between friends, One day you're friends, one day you're not. Could be spreading those secrets all over school, things like that. Cyberbullying, this one's becoming crazier and crazier. This is anything that happens over technology. It's often off school grounds. Sometimes it's a continuation of school bullying. But right, the bully can be anonymous. It happens 24/7. You can be humiliated on a worldwide platform, and it's really hard for adults to intervene and do anything about. I might have shared this story before, but I was at one of the high schools one morning, and somebody had posted something on TikTok that somebody didn't like, and people kept coming up to the principal. Well, it was posted like outside of school hours. The principal can't control somebody's social media account, right? What are they supposed to do? It was way easier when people just punched each other. We knew what to do with that, right? I don't know what to do with this, but a lot of times even kids won't report it because, right, if my kid tells me they're getting bullied online, what's the first thing I'm gonna do? I'm gonna take away his phone. So therefore, he's not gonna wanna tell me he's being bullied on social media. Sexual or homophobic bullying, this is anything that focuses on a person's appearance, body part, sexual orientation, or sexual activity. It could be sexual jokes, comments, touching, spreading rumors, things like that. Anybody can be a bully. There's no single factor that predicts who's going to be the bully and who's not. They say kind of two types of kids. One is that popular, well-connected kid. The other end of that spectrum is that kid that really doesn't have the social skills. Maybe you pick last for games. But there is typically an imbalance of power, right? In the days where we just punched each other, the bully was the big kid on the schoolyard, right? And it was size that gave the imbalance of power. But now it can be popularity, intellect, access to social media, things like that. Typically, a bully has a role model. They find it exciting. They like that aggression. They can justify all their actions. They don't feel remorse for it. Just like anybody can be a bully, anybody can be a target. Most targets are passive victims that don't really do anything to provoke the bully. There are some kids that are more provocative and do something to provoke the bullying. Little brother probably did something to get his head hit into the bus window, I'm guessing. Overall, bullies look for people that will show distress, relinquish their lunch money, right, get sad, but are less likely to report them. That was Big Brother's mistake. Okay. Again, your passive victims, sometimes these are the kids pick last for games, social outcasts. They don't know how to use humor to deflect the bullying, things like that. Sometimes there are provocative victims, right? They poke the bear. They sometimes in other situations are the bully. And then we have bystanders. These are the people that witness the bullying. Sometimes they will get involved. They become the bully and they assist. Sometimes they reinforce. They just laugh and cheer, but they don't actually do the bullying. Sometimes they defend and try to stop it. And sometimes they're just bystanders. They watch, they don't get involved, but they don't stop it. They oftentimes don't know what to do. And bullying has an effect on all of those people. They say kids who are bullies as kids are more likely to grow up to be adult bullies, and your likelihood of being in jail increases. Bullying interrupts learning though, right? You don't want to go to school if you're going to get bullied. You may not want to answer questions in class if you think you're going to get made fun of. You may not take advanced classes if people are going to make fun of you, right? It has an impact. The targets of bullying, right? They could be, we see depression, anxiety, and sometimes that looks like loss of appetite, lack of sleep, headaches, stomach aches, things like that. The bystanders also might fear getting retaliated against by the bully. They might feel guilty for not intervening, right? They can have some feelings involved in that too. We know that having an adult step in and stop bullying is really important. They say for boys, bullying often occurs playgrounds, bus stops, going to from school, bathrooms, locker rooms. I think places where you're up and active tends to attract the guys. For girls, hallways, lunchrooms, classrooms, whether or not teachers are present or not. But again, several studies say that bullying is often goes undetected by kids or not taken seriously by adults. So they asked students said the adults intervened 25% of the time. The adults said we get involved 71% of the time, right? There's a huge discrepancy on whether we take it seriously or not. And I don't know that they'll always intentionally, right? If two kids are punching each other, we're probably going to intervene, hopefully, right? But if people are calling names or bickering with each other, we may not intervene. So it is tough. But it is really important that we shut it down. If we suspect the bullying, we've got to do our part to shut it down. Kids can also do their part too. And it's really important that we have clear expectations. In all of our school buildings, we see social contracts on all the walls, things like that. You all probably set expectations on your bus, what behavior is okay and what behavior is not, and then you have to enforce those expectations or they're not going to do you any good. Ultimately, we want everybody to feel safe and secure coming and going and being at school. So, don't be a bully. There's your lesson. All right, this section's on sexual harassment. The EEOC is who enforces these laws. Illegal sexual harassment exists when someone's behavior is so frequent or intense that a hostile work environment is created. A lot of people who just don't like their coworkers or boss will call me and tell me it's a hostile work environment. Under the letter of the law, it's only a hostile work environment if they're a jerk due to a sex-related protection. So, just while we don't want anybody to be a jerk, it's not illegal to be a jerk. It's illegal to sexually harass somebody, and that's how you're being a jerk. So we're going to talk about quid pro quo, hostile work environment, and violence against women. Quid pro quo means something for something. In other words, you give me this, I'll give you that. If you accept my sexual advances, I'll give you a raise, a promotion, something positive. If you decline my sexual advances, I'm going to demote you, fire you, put you on a bad shift, right? All of that is illegal. A, I shouldn't be making sexual advances at work, and B, I can't make employment decisions based on those. I talk a lot. Didn't skip slides. Okay. Hostile work environment. This is when behavior is severe or pervasive. So it can be a one-time action that is so severe that it creates a hostile work environment and I don't feel comfortable working there anymore. Or it can be pervasive. So it's not that bad, but it's all the time. And in order to do my job, I have to put up with it. And so again, it can be severe or it can be pervasive. Sometimes those behaviors that are pervasive are things that might be okay in a social situation, but aren't okay in a workplace, right? If I'm out on Friday night in my social life and an acquaintance comes up and gives me a hug, I might be okay with that. If every morning when I got to work, my boss came up and gave me a hug, I would not be okay with that. I have like a big personal bubble around me, right? And so, and again, sexual harassment is one of those things. What I'm okay with, you might not be okay with, and vice versa. We often think about sexual harassment being in the office, the boss to the subordinate, right? But we work in a very different environment from that. And so it can really be any environment connected to your job. And it can be anyone. It's not just boss to subordinate. It could be coworker to coworker. It could be outside vendor, things like that. And so when we look at and are trying to decide if it's sexual harassment, we're going to look at the nature of the conduct, the frequency, and the severity, and the target of the behavior. So the intended target isn't always the person that you think it is, right? It wasn't sexual harassment, but it was more of racial harassment. I had a vendor one time, a couple people working in one room, and they started talking about immigration, things like that. And the person in the office next door overheard it and was offended by the conversation. She was not the intended target of the conversation, right? But she ends up being the victim. And so we've got to shut that down before it becomes pervasive. So very similar here. They give some examples of sexual harassment. Like if you need an example, this is probably a problem, right? Come see me later. But really, it could be direct, indirect threats, sex, sexual innuendos, comments, touching, patting, tickling. Like, just don't tickle people at work, right? There you go. Rating someone's sexuality, if every time I walk through, they're like, she's a 2, right? Not appropriate. Spreading rumors, calling names, illicit photos, things like that. I gotta throw in some snarks so you guys stay awake. Okay. There is no single test of whether it's sexual harassment or not. What's appropriate for one person, not appropriate for another person. I always laugh. I am incredibly fortunate that my grandma is still on Facebook, right? Because there is my litmus test for can I post it, because grandma is going to see it. right? Sexual harassment. Would you act this way if your family was in the room, or would you want your family treated this way? And then VAWA, Violence Against Women Act, defines sexual assault as an offense classified as a forcible, non-forcible sex offense under the Uniform Crime Reporting System of the FBI. Dating violence falls under this, and this is violence committed by a person who is or has been in a social or romantic, intimate relationship with the victim. Domestic violence, crimes against people who have been a spouse, partner, cohabitated, or shared a child with the other. And then stalking, which is engaging in a course of conduct directed at a specific person that would cause a reasonable person to fear for his or her safety or the safety of others, or to suffer substantial emotional distress. So harassment and bullying are very similar in a lot of ways, but because harassment is based on sex, which is a protected class under law, it gets more attention and scrutiny than just regular bullying. They give student-to-student examples too. Like, it's all inappropriate. So clearly, if you ever come across sexual harassment, especially student-to-student, make sure you separate them right away, and that's when you get to report it to somebody else who's probably better prepared to deal with it. Can't even imagine if Tony called me in and said, "Excuse me, Mrs. Clark, help me understand," right? It's not going to be a fun conversation. So, again, shut down the sexual harassment, and then we will investigate. I am the Title IX coordinator for the school district. Title IX is what governs sexual harassment laws within education. And so we will investigate. If it's ever adult to student, we have to go through a very formal investigation process. If it's adult to adult, sometimes we can go through a little less formal investigation process. But it's important that things get reported and addressed right away. We ultimately, right, again, we want everybody to feel safe and secure at work, at school, and so we'll take those things seriously. If someone ever reports sexual harassment to you, again, make sure you get them to me. There are some new Title IX regulations floating out there right now. They got held up in the courts. And part of those are making sure that students understand their rights under these laws and know who the Title IX coordinator is. So you are always welcome to share my information with people if they feel they need that. Questions on that? So the other section of state annual required training that we're delivering a little bit differently this year is on suicide awareness. And so we'll have to coordinate, figure out when we're going to do that with you all. By statute, it has to be an hour long, which is a challenge sometimes. But we have a district mental health intervention team, and they have put together a really great training this year that they're going around and presenting live. So hopefully they can get in front of you all at some point and do that. But I would say on the suicide prevention thing, the number one thing to remember is if someone has shared suicidal thoughts or ideations, do not leave them alone. If you drop them off at their bus stop and then come back and tell Kathy, you know that kid talked about killing themselves when they got home, Kathy better run you out of town, okay? Right? Because by the time Kathy gets a hold of that parent, it could be too late. Turn around, bring them back, call in, whatever you need to do. But do not leave somebody alone who has shared suicidal thoughts. You don't know what's waiting for them at the end of that bus ride. I would rather you be safe than sorry. Have I made that point like super clear? Because I'm on a soapbox and I get it. Okay. Any questions in general about any of the stuff I just talked about? Anybody still awake? Yes.
You said sexual harassment should be reported to you?
Yes.
Do we not go to Tony?
You can go to your supervisor. If that doesn't get resolved, you can work your way up.
Okay.
Yep. So the other thing from an HR perspective, two things, I guess. One is timekeeping. We're working on trying to simplify things for you all. We know it's an issue. But in the past, when you clocked in and out, it always rounded to the nearest 15 minutes. It's no longer going to do that. It's going to record actual time. And so we will pay by the minute instead of closest 15 minutes. So just know that that is a change. Benefit open enrollment should open tomorrow. Whether you take our district health insurance or not, we're going to ask that everybody go into that system and elect or decline benefits. along with health insurance, we offer lots of other benefits, and that's why we ask people to go in there and do that. We are switching from Blue Cross Blue Shield to United Healthcare, and that will start on October 1st. Our plan year runs October 1st through September 30th, and so that will be a change for us. It was a way to decrease our premiums. The board is also contributing more, so most of our employees will see a decrease in what they're paying for health insurance. So yeah, right? Hallelujah. We are excited. We'll continue to offer, for a long time we've offered 2 PPO plans, kind of your traditional insurance plans, one with a $500 deductible, one with a $3,000 deductible, and there's co-insurance on those. There is a high deductible health plan, which attracts some people because it seems the cheapest, but keep in mind that a qualified high deductible health plan does not have first dollar coverage. So your preventative would be covered, but then if you go in for like a sinus infection, instead of paying a $25 copay, you're gonna spend $85 to $130, whatever that office visit costs. Insurance isn't gonna pay anything till you've reached your deductible, which is like $6,500. So, right, if you end up in the emergency room, you're gonna pay $6,500 before insurance starts covering anything. So just know that that's the difference on a high deductible health plan. They can be great tools, but you gotta be really good at saving money so you have that money should you need it. They're also gonna offer a new plan this year called Surest. And this is a completely copay-based plan, and you have to be a little tech savvy because it's all kind of through an app. You could go to the app, put in, I have a sinus infection, and it's gonna pop up a list of providers. It's gonna tell you, here's a couple of teledocs you could go to, and the cost is gonna be $0. Here, you could go to a retail clinic like the Little Clinic, and it's gonna be $15. Or you can go to an office visit with these providers, and here's how much it's gonna cost you. And then that is what you're gonna pay. You're not gonna wait for it to process through insurance, right? And then you get a bill, which is kind of cool, because you can put in there, like, I'm having a baby, and it will tell you, if you go to Wesley, it's gonna be $900, and it's gonna cover your anesthesia, your labs, your hospital stay, right, and your doctor, which, especially when it comes to hospitalizations, you keep getting bills, and you're like, I don't even know who that person was, but apparently they touched me, and now they're billing me, right? And so the Surest plan is pretty cool in that that price it gives you up front is what you're paying, but you will continue to pay that copay that you see on the site until you reach your out-of-pocket maximum. So it's a different way to think about healthcare. It gives you a lot more transparency in what you're paying. So we're excited to offer that 4th plan that's a little bit different for our employees. Wichita Public Schools has been offering it for a while. I talked to their benefits manager and she loves it. She thought it was really great, especially for young adults that don't really understand insurance and deductibles and copays and all the things, right? And so definitely, I think this morning, Lori sent out the benefits guide, which is like an online flip book that you can go through and look at all the details. Hopefully tomorrow we will have the actual enrollment site up ready for you to click through. And then our benefits experts will be on site. They're going to be over at Impact on the 12th that morning. So if you have individual questions and you want to talk to them, pop by. There is a speaker at 9:30.